Hi everyone, hope you're having a really good day. I just want to chat to you a little bit about the time of the Kingdom of Israel. I'm hoping to write a book on the kings of the divided Kingdom of Israel. I hope that will be helpful and when it comes out. But today I just want to talk about two particular men who were used in a military sense by God in the times of the kings of Israel. One was a chap called Joab, who was the commander of King David's armies, and the other was a chap called Jehu, who was also a commander in the army, but was actually ended up coming to the throne of the northern kingdom of Israel. Joab was, as I said, he was David's main man. He was his commander of his army, and Joab was absolutely loyal to David. He would do whatever David wanted. Whatever the king, his lord, said, he would do it unquestionably. And in some ways it was to his credit. He would do every bidding of David. And he was used in a most amazing way by God. God used him in a sense to exact judgment on the enemies of Israel, those who were opposed to the Jewish state, those who would cause trouble for the nation. At times, his loyalty was too much. He should have questioned certain things and he didn't. For example, when David sent that awful message saying, "Make sure Uriah the Hittite is killed in battle," Joab unquestionably followed his king's wicked orders because his loyalty was to David. And of course, David's reasoning was that he would somehow avoid the consequence of his adultery with Uriah's wife Bathsheba. But Joab just did it, and Uriah was killed. At other times, Joab was even used to rebuke and challenge his king, and it seems that David actually listened to him. When Absalom, David's son, rebelled against his own father and took the kingdom off him, he'd also killed one of his half-brothers. He also, the Bible graphically tells us, slept with David's own concubines in the full view of everyone. He sought to humiliate his own father, and of course he took his king and tried to kill him. David had to flee for his life. But when the tables were turned and David regained the kingdom, Joab made sure that Absalom would not live to tell the tale, and he had him put to death. But I think he killed him himself, and he was probably right to do so. When David heard of Absalom's demise, David went into mourning. Now we can understand that, although his son had been utterly wicked, he's still his son. But I think what would have been more right is if David had quietly mourned for Absalom, but then governed the people. Instead, David went off almost into a time of depression, and Joab in the end had to go and see him and say, "What are you doing? Do you not care about your people? Do you not care about your army? Do you not care about the people who have fought for you? Sort yourself out. Give your head a wobble. Give yourself a shake. And get back to being the king that God's called you to." And David listened to him. And what Joab did was absolutely right. That's the good side of Joab. But unfortunately, there was a very bad side to Joab. He unquestioningly did what David said when it was a wicked order to have Uriah the Hittite killed. But when David said merciful things like spare Abner's life, do this, do that, Joab wouldn't listen. And there was a chap called Abner, and Joab made sure that he was killed even at the even though he expressly disobeyed his king's orders. He also went too far in judging the Edomites. It says this: "Then the Lord raised up Hadad the Edomite, a member of Edom's royal family, to be Solomon's adversary. Years before, David had defeated Edom. Joab, his army commander, had stayed to bury some of the Israelite soldiers who had died in battle. While there, they killed every man in Edom. Joab and the army of Israel had stayed there for 6 months, killing them. But Hadad and a few of his father's royal officials escaped and headed for Egypt, and he became a thorn in the flesh of Israel from that time on." Why? Because of bitterness, because Joab had gone too far. It seemed he loved the taste of blood. He loved killing people. He was a heartless, a ruthless, and a cruel individual by the sound of it. Intensely loyal to his king, which was to his credit, But he went too far. And in the end, David was so fed up with Joab that he actually said to Solomon, look, I'm not going to have Joab put to death. He's been too loyal to me. But he has lived by the sword overly. Made sure he doesn't die peacefully. And Solomon made sure that Joab was put to death. And from what the Bible tells us, Joab was used as an agent for God. He was used to speak up for what is right for the people of Israel, for God's kingdom. But he went too far. And it seems that while he was loyal to David, we don't get any sense that Joab had any sort of relationship with God himself. And he certainly didn't act in such a way. It was, if in doubt, kill it, seemed to be his standpoint. Years later, a chap called Jehu was very similar. Jehu was an army commander who was anointed to become the king of Israel and to exact judgment on the house of Ahab, who was an incredibly wicked king. And Jehu did that to a T. He executed judgment on all those people and took the throne. And it seems that he was God's man for the job. But again, we don't see Jehu having a relationship with God. He just did what was right in his own eyes. He was obviously very pleased to be anointed for this purpose, and he knew that he would be helped by God. But it seems that he didn't have a relationship with God either. It was all about protecting his kingdom and doing what was right in his sight. And again, being as vengeful and bloodthirsty as possible. These two men, they remind me of the Crusaders, actually. People who pertain to a religiosity and to fighting for God, but actually were bloodthirsty and wicked. And religion without grace is very dangerous. Religion, cold, hard religion without a relationship with God is dangerous. The zeal that Jehu and Joab showed was wonderful. In fact, we can learn from them. But their application we certainly should not learn from. They remind me a little bit also of Henry VIII, an old king of England. He felt that he was anointed by God and called to his position, but he brooked no challenge and again was bloodthirsty in holding his power and doing what he thought was right in his own eyes. Again, not an example to follow. We serve a God who hates sin, and we must also stand against sin and wrongdoing. But it should not be what primarily defines us. What primarily defines us, we serve a God who loves us and who has forgiven us. A God who is merciful and gracious. A God who has made it possible for us to have a relationship with him. We must not act as purely religious men and women, but as people who love God and show his love to others. The way to live for God is to show his love, to show the light of the gospel, and to walk in his ways. At the end of the day, while David made his mistakes, he at least was willing to change. He at least was willing to come under God's authority. And so God actually spoke of him as a man after his own heart. For all David's faults, and we all have faults, don't we? None of us are perfect. We need to follow more his example than the example of Joab or Jehu. I'll leave you with Micah chapter 6, verse 8. And this should be how we seek to live our lives. Know, O people, the Lord has told you what is good. And this is what he requires of you, to do what is right, to love mercy, and to walk humbly with your God. May we be known as agents of God's grace and his love and his forgiveness. May we walk in his steps and show people what's right in his sight, but show love as well. Amen. Have a great day.